Good morning, everyone. I'm Randy Miller. I'm a Visty's chair here in the Austin area. I have four groups of executives that I mentor and coach, CEOs, C-level execs. Um, I find business owners, especially in CEOs, fascinating. I really truly believe that as a business owner, especially, you are a trailblazer in a particular industry. And it's just so interesting to me to hear and talk to people like Peter that we're talking to today to find out their experience and what brought them to their current path. So today we're talking, as I mentioned, to Peter Voss. He's the founder and chief scientist to Aigo AI. Uh, Peter, you have a very impressive career. What and you're an early adopter of AI. I mean, you go back a long way before a lot of people even thought of AI. What would you share your background with us and what drove you to pursue this path?
Yes, certainly. I started out as an electronics engineer and started my own electronics company doing industrial electronics. And then I fell in love with software, and my company turned into a software company. So I developed an ERP software suite, and we did pretty well. We went from the garage to 400 people and actually did an IPO. So that was really exciting. And I've always been involved in both sides of as a CEO of the company and also as chief scientist because it's just inherently I love to innovate, develop things, and so on. But I also like to see them actually work in the real world. So the business side of things, it's very satisfying to develop something and actually see it help people create value and so on. So that's why I've always kind of had these two hats on. So when I sold my interest in the listed company, in the software company, I had enough time and money on my hands to say, well, what big project do I want to tackle, going forward? And what struck me is that in that software really is quite dumb. Software itself doesn't have common sense. It can't learn, it can't reason. And while I was very proud of the software we created, I could see those limitations. So the mission I've been on really for the last 25 plus years is how can we build systems that can think, learn, and reason like humans? It can learn interactively, have common sense, and so on. And of course, that's a field of AI. So I took off 5 years just to study different aspects of intelligence, starting with epistemology, the theory of knowledge. How do we know anything? What is reality? And do we have free will? What is consciousness? Those kinds of things. So how do we learn? Also studying cognitive psychology. What do IQ tests measure? How do children learn? How does our intelligence differ from animals? And so the culmination of all of that is really what launched my AI company, my first AI company. And actually in 2002, I got together with a few other people who felt the time had come to go back to the original ideal of AI to build thinking machines. And three of us coined the term artificial general intelligence, and we wrote a book. And that was, 2002. We didn't really know that this term would kind of catch on eventually 20 years later. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm reading and almost finished the book, The Coming Wave, Mustafa Suleiman, and he talks about what AI is going to do for us to benefit us, but then the cautions of what if it goes the other direction. And I keep on thinking of Terminator. I don't know if you ever saw the movie,
Right.
but the artificial intelligence is taking over us. Where do you think we're going in a positive? What's your perspective?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's very positive. I think AGI will boost human flourishing tremendously. And let me give you like three areas, and then we can come back to saying why I don't believe the negative perspective is actually realistic. I mean, on the positive side, imagine you have one AGI, this is full human level, like intelligence in a machine. You have one AGI that trains itself to become a cancer researcher, PhD level cancer researcher. And of course, it can train itself because, like a human, it can hit the books. So you now have this PhD level cancer researcher AI. You can now make 1 million copies of it. And you have 1 million PhD level cancer researchers chipping away at the problem, pursuing different paths and ideas, and sharing ideas much, much more effectively than humans do, without the ego getting in the way, and they can easily share, big pieces of knowledge that they gained. And you apply this to every area of research, whether it's making better batteries or nanotechnologies, nanobots that can go inside our bodies and repair things, or fusion energy, or quantum computers, pollution, climate change. So anyway, in terms of scientific research, AGI will be a tremendous benefit. The second area is, of course, that it'll dramatically reduce the cost of goods and services by being able to automate at a much lower cost virtually every desk-bound job that there is. But the third category is actually the one that I think is most important for human flourishing, even more important than the other two I mentioned, and that is what I call a personal assistant. And the reason I double up on the word personal is two different meanings. The one is you own it. It serves your agenda, not some mega corporation's agenda. That's truly yours. You control what it shares with whom and so on. And the second personal is it's hyper personalized to you. It gets to know more and more about you, whatever you want to share about your history, your goals, and your worries, and so on. So it becomes, on the one hand, almost like an exocortex, an extension to your brain. And on the other hand, it's like an angel on your shoulder that you can ask advice. Should I get into this relationship, or should I break off this relationship? Should I start this company? Should I, move to another city, or whatever? And it'll help you think things through much more clearly than we as humans tend to be able to think and gather more information. I think that'll be tremendous benefit for humanity.
You talk about the angel on your shoulder, and if you're religious at all, you also then think about the angel on one shoulder and who's on the other shoulder, the devil, right?
No.
And so hopefully there's no devil, right?
No,
So
no. The devil is in our heads, and so a little angel will help you fight the devil of doing things that you regret.
So I've read. Go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, no, you go ahead. You read.
I read that there was some concern by an author, and I wish I could remember his name, who talked about the future of history. That at some point in time, and he projected about 5 years ago, in 10 years, that we'd have 20% of the world population that would be unemployable because of robotics and AI and so forth, either because they weren't willing to retrain or they weren't capable. Do you have any fear for that possibility?
Well, I would turn that on its head and sort of do a jujitsu on it and say, do I fear that? If you ask the average person that you meet, would you like to win the lottery? What are they going to say? Of course, I'd love to win the lottery because then I don't have to work. I can do the things that I really want to do, whatever that might be. Now, of course, people may struggle with, you be careful what you ask for, but again, your angel on your shoulder can help you cope with this newfound freedom where people have to work much fewer hours to be able to afford all the things that they need because of this much higher productivity. So absolutely, there will be much less need for human labor because of massive automation, but really it'll further reduce the number of hours we have to work, or whether we have to work at all. And that to me seems to be a positive thing. Now, there will be massive amounts of of problems that still need to be solved. And I think more and more people that are sort of in the more privileged parts of the world, like us, will shift our focus and our efforts to helping uplift the other parts of the world. I lived in Africa for many years, and there's a tremendous amount of growth still needed for Africa to uplift itself, and of course other parts of the world are the same. So I think more and more people will probably shift their focus to those kinds of things if they don't have to work for a living, or if they don't have to work as many hours to cover their expenses. So yeah, it's really that fear I think needs to be relooked at from an opportunity to free up people to do things that are actually more meaningful to them.
I actually grew up in a small farm in Ohio,
Mhm.
and I was amazed here fairly recently to find how actual farming in the United States, especially, has changed so much.
Mhm.
I mean, when my dad was, I was in the middle school time frame. He had a three bottom plow. It was a small little Ford tractor with three bottoms.
Mhm.
He came from a horse with a one bottom plow, so this was three times more efficient. Then we
Right.
got the second tractor and had two three bottom plows, and that doubled our efficiency and our
Mhm.
decreased the amount of time. But now they're talking six, they don't even plow. It's 16 rows basically. They're doing all
Mm.
at the same time. They're actually, instead of using weed killer on the weeds, they're zapping them with
Mhm.
electricity. So there's very specific. There's no waste on where the corn or wheat or whatever is planted. The
Right.
rows know when to shut off. They can make them narrower. Production is more than doubled since in the last 30,
Mhm.
40 years. It's amazing what AI has done and make them more efficient. What else do you see in your kind of crystal ball that's going to really benefit mankind?
Well, I mean, what I've been talking about already, just the scientific advances to really be able to conquer diseases, that and really help people flourish. I think the one area that I didn't mention specifically is governance, where AGI will really help us manage our affairs better. I mean, you just look at America, and I think most people would probably agree right now. The two candidates we have, are those the two best, possibly the best people we could find, to run America or to be president of America? Probably not. You look at the rest of the world, there's just so much conflict. So AGI again can help us figure out how we can manage our affairs with less strife and more effectively. So governance, I think, is another area. But really, there are so many benefits in AGI. But I think the other part that I do want to mention, and we can come back to your original question of why the sort of Terminator scenario
Mm-hmm.
why I believe that's quite unrealistic. But the one thing I do want to mention is that we actually on a really bad trajectory right now with AI. And you know, we now have this massive increase in the amount of computing power and data that's required. The current AI models that are built, large language models, like ChatGPT and the next generations of those, take hundreds of millions of dollars, and people are projecting that they might cost as much as $100 billion to build these models. And the amount of electricity that they need, I mean, they're basically recommissioning 3 Mile Island to have a nuclear power station to just power one data center for Microsoft. So there's and it makes absolutely no sense. It's just there's so much momentum, there's so much money going in, and just more money follows in, and there's this huge bubble. But it makes absolutely no sense when you consider that our brain uses 20 watts of power, not 20 gigawatts. It doesn't need a nuclear power station to power our intelligence. And a child can learn with maybe 2 million words, not 20 trillion words that they put into these large language models. So it's fundamentally the wrong approach. And the approach that will get us to AGI has been ignored because there's been so much momentum on big data. All the big companies have a lot of data, they have a lot of compute, so that's a hammer they've got. So they look for nails. But the right way to get to AGI is what is called cognitive AI, where your starting point is not, we've got a lot of data, what can we do with that? The starting point is, what makes human intelligence so special? What are the requirements of human intelligence? And that's the ability to learn interactively, to absorb things like the conversation we're having now. We're learning from each other. When you say something, I think about it. Does it make sense? Do I understand it? Does it disagree with something? Do I want to ask other questions? So it's a very interactive process, human intelligence. And that is the approach which doesn't require nuclear power stations and massive amounts of data. But that path is largely ignored up to now. I think that will change because the big data is not going to get us to this kind of intelligence that we really need.
It reminds me of a young engineer, Jonathan Miller, I was talking to several months ago, and his company is working on exactly what you talked about, and that is taking data on what are the possible diseases a person has with certain symptoms. Put the symptoms in,
right,
and then it tells you what test. His vision is then what tests to take to validate that you have this disease or that. And he mentioned that we aren't really there yet with AI, kind of what you're alluding to. Right now, it's just data manipulation.
Correct.
And getting to that point is kind of a leap and bound ahead of where we are currently.
Right. Absolutely. But more and more people are realizing that the current path does not have a future to get to AGI. But when there's so much money going in, it's very difficult for people to say, well, the emperor has no clothes ultimately. And but there are very prominent people like the chief scientist of Meta, of Facebook Meta, the chief AI scientist, Jan LeCun. He recently said large language models are an off-ramp to AGI, a distraction, a dead end. So he puts it very forcefully, and I totally agree with him. But people who work on big data that's really the only way they can think about the problem.
That's what Mustafa says in The Coming Waves I mentioned before is as this AI grows and becomes more capable, as you're talking about, it'll take less time, it'll become more efficient, and that'll just continually happen over time. And I see that as a real benefit to what you're doing currently in your company.
Correct. Yes. I mean, with our approach with cognitive AI, you can train a model with a few million pieces of information to have language competency and reasoning, and you can do this on a off-the-shelf computer. You don't need massive. You can do it in hours and not months. So it really is a different approach that hasn't generally been discovered yet.
Thinking back, in your background, what has been your greatest leadership challenge?
Actually, this is an interesting question because when I worked as an employee in electronics and other things, I always looked at management and sales and said, these people just sit around in their chairs and talk all day. I'm doing the work as an engineer. They earn all the money. This seems like crazy. Now, having started, probably a dozen companies by now and try to grow them, the most difficult thing to find is good managers and good salespeople. And good sales managers are just about impossible to find. So the realization of just how difficult it is to sell, to be a good salesperson, and how difficult it is to be a good manager. It's really hard. It seems from the outside it seems easy, but it's really a challenge finding that. So I think consistently I've found getting really good managers and especially sales managers is tough. It's really hard. There are very, very few people who have those skills. And of course, the common mistake is made that the best salespeople are made managers, and it's complete mismatch, or the best
Right.
engineers are made managers, and again, it's a mismatch. But on the other hand, the managers do need to understand sales, and they do need to understand engineering if that's what they're responsible for. So it's yeah, that's probably consistently the biggest challenge I've come across.
Yeah, I see that quite often in CEOs and business owners where they're very good in their industry, like you're very good at AI,
Mhm.
but where their challenge lies are the other specialties, the managing a marketing director,
Mhm.
manage a sales director, managing those other things that you need in a company, but most CEOs, business owners don't have expertise and may have never done it before. And
Right.
now, how do you manage people you really don't really understand, kind of like you're talking about?
Right, right. It is a challenge, and for myself, I had to really, I mean, do a lot of selling myself, get deeply immersed in marketing to understand it, to be in a better position to hire people who could then take that responsibility and to know if they're the right person. But what is also very helpful is really if you have co-founders, if you can have really, it people who really have skin in the game, who aren't just hired. They're not just working for you for the money, but people who are really passionate, who see it as their own company. So if you can get two or three co-founders, that cover these different aspects of business, I think that's ideal.
Yeah, that's what I find being involved myself in Vistage for 21 years, bringing other business owners who have those kind of expertise that are your kind of your sounding board, people
Hmm.
that are willing to question your answers, kind of like you're talking about, can give you advice that you may not have in your current company, your hierarchy, so to speak. Um,
Right,
so
right, yeah.
it's a very interesting parallels, I think,
Mhm,
to what you're
mhm.
talking about. Let's
Right.
go back to that question I asked before, and that is
Mhm.
the Terminator scenario. What
Right.
are you, is there anything you're concerned about that AI could be negative?
Um, so I think the biggest problem we have with AI right now is that it's not smart enough. It doesn't know when it doesn't know something. It will confidently
Mm,
give you bad information because it's too dumb. It's not smart enough. So I think a lot of the um, problems we have with AI are really based on the limitations of AI. But let me talk about the Terminator, or the sort of AI is going to kill us all idea. Um, we're in a very unfortunate situation for people to make that kind of assessment, because on the one hand, we've had Hollywood bombard us for decades with AI is a bad guy, always is a bad guy. Um, in fact, one of the famous directors once called me in to consult on a film, give advice on. So I went through the script and a few things, few suggestions here and there, or something that didn't seem that plausible. But then I also went back and said, well, wouldn't it make a much better story if at the end of the movie, at the end of the story, the AIs and humans sort of supported each other and led to human flourishing? And there was no interest in that. Uh, the humans have to defeat the AI in the final minute. And so we've been indoctrinated with this view of AI as just being just negative. Actually, I think Japanese culture is quite different in that regard. I believe they generally are very pro technology and robots and things like that. But for us, yes, we've been indoctrinated. So that's kind of the default, and it's very hard to get that kind of emotional response, get rid of that. The second part is, unfortunately, there's a whole industry that's cropped up of AI, what's called sort of AI safety. And it's an industry that kind of feeds on itself. And over the last probably 5 or 10 years, probably for the last 5 years, more than $1 billion has gone into this industry, this fear-mongering industry that basically, and I'm not saying that the people involved a lot of the people are involved are really genuinely concerned. But of course, when you keep having money thrown at you, if you give the message AI is going to kill us all unless you give us money for us to solve the problem, by legislation, by coming up with better algorithms or whatever, you have that kind of industry that just reinforces it, and money is driving it, attracting more people, more and more things. The problem is the vast majority of people working in that field have never worked on AI, at least not in any serious way. So it's a sort of, they're building these castles in the air in terms of their logic. It's not based on how real systems in the real work actually work. So their starting point is, well, if a human was a lot smarter, wouldn't that be super dangerous? But humans are still driven largely by our reptile brains, by our basic drives for survival and reproduction, And AI doesn't have those drives. It's not going to have those drives. So to try and extrapolate from what humans would do if they were a lot smarter and had a lot more power really makes no sense. There are a lot of other kind of specific logic errors that they make, and there's no counterforce to them because nobody is raising money and paying money to organizations to debunk their arguments, basically. So, there are people like myself and so on who have studied this, and we have, I believe, good arguments to say that the fear mongering is vastly overblown and based on some really bad assumptions and bad logic, but we're not getting paid for that. It's we're doing other things with our lives, and it's very hard to get funding for an organization that says, hey, everything is going to be fine. It's much easier to get money and press and so on by saying it's going to kill us all unless you give us money,
Well, and that's not only true of the kind of anti-AI, but just think of all the other places in the world, and especially here in the US, where fear mongering is a industry.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
On its own, right? There's quite a few of those out there. So I appreciate that perspective. So, well,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, with just normal newspapers and media generally, I mean, bad news sells.
Right, and it's gotten so bad that they make the weather even seem like it's a threat.
Right.
When it's overblown. You can't just get the weather anymore.
Correct. Yeah.
Well, Peter, I really appreciate your time today, and I think you've given us a lot to think about. I'm encouraged by what you're telling us and where you're going in AI. Thank you for sharing your time with us today.
Yes, well, thanks for having me. And anybody in Austin here, love to connect if they're interested in taking AGI forward.
Appreciate that very much.